I have a few recollections of the founder, Joseph Remington, and other founding members. We're here by uh, the statue by Pat Monk called The Family that my parents actually donated to the church. Pat Monk, the sculptor, John Stevens affectionately called it the Spoonheads. So uh, happy to be here on this beautiful morning. Joseph Joy Remington, our founder. In the early 1950s, as young families, many with 3 or 4 kids, settled into the communities of Holland Hills and Toxamont, Joseph Joy Remington realized that as these children became of school age, and many of the Catholic families in our neighborhood were sending their children to Sunday school, there was a need for a non-creedal religious instruction based in free and rational inquiry. Joe posted in the community's newsletters his famous question, "Unitarianism, anyone?" And on September 25th, 1955, after 60 individuals responded, the Mount Vernon Unitarian Church was born. These were exciting times. Our first minister was the Reverend A. Powell Davies, whose inspiring and challenging sermons were piped in over telephone wires from All Souls Unitarian Church in Washington, D.C. In our neighborhood, the Hosmers, the Vances, the Netcharts, Bruce Netchart was our first choir director, and the Merrifields would gather on Sunday afternoons to discuss and debate Reverend Davies' sermons. Joe had all of Reverend Davies' sermons recorded on 78 discs, and for many years, his wife Rosie told me, neighbors were invited to the Remingtons' household to hear once again Reverend Davies' sermons. In those early days, Joseph was a powerful and inspirational presence in our religious community. Pause for the airplanes. When Joe was dying of cancer, my parents invited the Remingtons to our house for Thanksgiving dinner. My mother seated Joe at the head of the table, and when the turkey was ready, she asked Joe if he would say grace. Joe responded, "Bless the bread, damn the meat, come on folks, let's eat." When Joe died, I remembered that when I was in LRY, Liberal Religious Youth, Joe, who loved Fats Waller's music, played his Your Feet's Too Big for our group and told us that when Fats sings I Really Hate You, if we substituted because your color is black for because your feet's too big, that we would experience the strong undercurrent of prejudice inherent in Waller's song. We were able to find a 45 RPM recording of Your Feet's Too Big that we played at Joe's service, which captured the strength and influence of Joe's teaching for those gathered to remember him on that day. That's it. Okay. Should we go right on?
Sure. Yeah, you're on a roll.
Okay. Josephine Jo Carr and her husband King Carr, who had been crippled with polio in his youth. Jo Carr was our first director of religious education, and she was a wonderful presence for us youngsters. I, at age 6, dearly loved her. She taught us, without apology for the reference to the Lord, the Thanksgiving song, "We gather together to ask the Lord's blessing," that to this day brings me much joy to sing as I remember all the words at Thanksgiving time. She was my friend Jeannie Carr's mother, and I was quite envious. Jeannie always had such wonderful birthday parties. One year, Jo Carr, her mother, had placed certain objects in paper bags, and us kids were asked to reach into the bags and identify the objects. Much to our surprise, we discovered that one bag contained calves' brains. Years later, Jeannie arrived at a high school reunion with her wife and two little adopted black babies. Her career, I learned from her, was as a statistician tracking the incidence of HIV and AIDS around the world. Not long after, I was present at my parents' house when the Carrs were visiting. I remarked rather thoughtlessly that they were not responsible for Jeannie's decisions, and King Carr immediately responded, "Oh no, we are quite closely involved." How lovely was that? When Jo died, I was living in New York and could not attend her service, but I did select a poem of Emily Dickinson that my father read at the service. Jo and King Carr are buried in the memorial walks, and it is with such a lovely remembrance that I visit their gravesites. John and Jane Kofler. I did not know John and Jane Kofler well. Their daughter, Susie Kofler, was my age, and we went to Sunday school together. But I was certainly aware of their wonderful artworks that adorned the walls of our church and seemed to be part of the fabric of our religious observance. They, of course, created the beautiful stained glass window that adorns our chapel, and their legacy continues, as even this weekend I enjoyed their paintings displayed on the walls of the fireplace alcove adjacent to the common. These treasures continue to connect us to the very founding 70 years ago of the Mount Vernon Unitarian Church. John Stevens, our first sexton. When we were negotiating the purchase of our beautiful boxwood gardens with Merle Thorpe, he agreed to the sale only on the condition that we retain John Stevens as the caretaker of the property. For many years, before the building of Mason Hill, John, a knowledgeable horticulturalist, had tended and propagated the boxwoods, built the greenhouse, and knew every inch of the many acres of forest known to us as the Thorpe Estate. He lived with his family on the grounds, kept bloodhounds that terrified us kids as we passed by to explore the forest and the boxwood gardens. John Stevens hunted raccoons and had close ties to the land that had once stretched all the way to the river back to the Depression. Once, while driving on Fort Hart Road, I saw a silver fox crossing the road. I drove up the hill, and seeing John Stevens, I told him I had seen a silver fox crossing the road. John responded, "Those Virginia gray foxes do look a little silver. That was old Reynard." He knew him as closely as if he was a brother. John's son, Alan Stevens, for many years a talented puppeteer with the company at Glen Echo, directed us high school kids with the Boxwood Theater Company on church grounds, where I played Romeo at age 16. Once, my friend Alec Micklejohn, who played Mercutio, fell awkwardly from Juliet's tower. The next day, we saw John Stevens walk with confident balance the entire peak of the roof of Holland Hall, perhaps as a lesson to us youngsters of the importance of self-awareness and keeping one's balance. John Stevens is dearly missed by those of us who knew him. And that's it.
That's great, Randy.
Okay.